Last week I put out a video showing how you could use Power Pivot in Excel to analyze multiple data tables. As long as you took those data tables and put them into a data model with relationships using a schema that we called a star schema, which allowed for there to be one fact table that was being analyzed and multiple dimension tables that were helping us to break down the facts. And in the comments to that was a simple question. Is it possible for Power Pivot to handle more than one fact table? And as you can see right here on my screen, I have a pivot table set up with one pivot chart that has expense data and another pivot chart that has sales data. So two different sets of facts. What are we spending money on and what are we getting money for? You can see here that they are coexisting in the same dashboard, and down here at the bottom, you'll notice that I have the ability to filter by the same concept down at the bottom, the same category. So here, if I click on pantry, it filters that the expenses and the sales were connected to pantry. And if I click on snack, again, they filter at the same time. So in this video, I'm going to demonstrate how you can create a data model that has two or more fact tables in it, and you could analyze all of that data as one big data model. We'll start by going back to the beginning. As you can see on my screen now, I have an Excel spreadsheet that has a fact table with sales in it, a fact table with expenses in it, a dimension table that has department and division in it, and then other dimensions for what type of customer it is or what type of vendor it is. And now, in order to analyze this data, the first thing we've got to do is convert all of these lists of data into tables of data. So I'm going to come in here and click on each one of these, go to the Insert tab at the top of the screen and click the Table button, or we could use the keyboard shortcut Control-T to solve this problem, and click OK. So this is our first fact table. These are all of our sales. So I'll click in the table name field at the top of the screen and type in the word sales. And then I'm just going to repeat myself. I'm clicking onto the data table over here to the right, which are expenses in it, using Control-T or Insert and then Table. And then again, naming that after the kind of data that's inside the table. In this case, it's expenses. And then further, dimension table number 1, click on it, Control-T, hit OK, and call this departments. Click on the next set, Control-T, and call it customers. And finally, click Control-T and vendors. Now, I say finally, we are going to come back to this sheet sometime soon. We're not quite there yet. Okay, next thing, you could right now add all of these data tables to the data model. Or another way to do it is to go to the Data tab at the top of the screen and find in the Data Tools section of the ribbon, there is a teeny tiny little green button with a drop-down menu on it, and you can establish that there are relationships. And the major concept of this data model is that both the sales and the expenses are related to the same table, so that they can both be filtered. So I click here on relationships, and I click to make a new relationship, and let's go ahead and connect all the tables for the data model. The first one, we want to connect our sales table to our departments table. And the way that we do that is we find the column in the sales table called department and the column in the departments table called department, and we say that when you see golden harvest here and you see golden harvest here, that should be the source of our relationship. We click OK. And now we do the same thing. I'm going to now connect my expenses. So I click on New, I choose my expense table, and again, my department table, and I find the column for department in both those two tables, and click OK. And now there is a relationship between our expense table and the department table, and our sales table and the department table. So as we move forward, we'll be able to filter both pivot tables based on department. But I do want to go a little deeper than that. So let's take a second here and make a new relationship between the sales table and the customers table, because of course we're selling to our customers. We'll use the customer column and the customer ID column to establish that relationship. And then when I click on new, I can establish there's a relationship between our expenses and our vendors. And we use the vendor column from the expense table and the vendor ID column from the vendors table. And when we click OK, we can now see that there are 4 relationships between these 5 tables. And further, if I click on close, if you don't already have the Power Pivot tab at the top of your screen, the way that you get it is by clicking on File in the top left-hand corner, going to the Options selection at the bottom of the File menu, and clicking on Add-ins. You ultimately want your Power Pivot add-on to be enabled. So I use the drop-down menu here for Manage, and I find my COM, C-O-M add-ins, and click Go. Make sure that you click the checkbox for Power Pivot for Excel and click OK, and you'll now have a Power Pivot tab at the top of the screen, and you'll be able to click on the button to manage the data model, which will open a window here that allows us to see all the components of the data model. In this case, we're talking about all 5 of those tables. And additionally, we're talking about the relationships between those tables. And the easiest way to see those relationships is by clicking on the Home tab at the top of the screen and clicking on the Diagram View button. So now let's talk about that star schema concept. In that previous video, we talked about the fact that there was a fact table. For the moment, let's imagine that expenses is the fact table. It's called that because every time we spent money is a fact. It is a thing that happened. And then we have dimension tables to help us understand what happened. In this instance, we know that we spent money with different vendors, and those vendors have a type and they have a state. And we also know that the people within different departments spent that money, and those departments fall into different divisions. But at the same time, we also see that we have a sales fact table that, again, we had a sale, and in each of those instances, the sale was connected to a dimension of who the customer was, as well as a dimension of what department this was. And this is why we call it sometimes either a constellation schema or a galaxy schema, because in both instances, we are talking about a set of stars, right? And I like constellation here because these stars are very clearly connected, right? So just like we draw lines between stars in a constellation, here we're drawing lines between our stars. So this is good. We can definitely make this happen. Let's go ahead and put together the dashboard that I showed you at the beginning of the video. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and close this dialog box, and I'm going to make a new sheet in my workbook, and I'll go ahead and call this the financial dashboard. And what we need is 2 pivot tables, one for expenses and the other one for sales. And we can get those by going to the Insert tab at the top of the screen, clicking the Pivot Table drop-down menu, and saying, yes, we'd like to make a pivot table that is based on the data model we've been building up so far. So I click here on From Data Model, and we click OK. And here, let's say that the first one is about sales, right? So we'll go to our sales table over here on the right, and we'll put in the checkbox sale amount. So what is the total sales amount for everybody in our organization? $22 million. Now, we want to break this down, and we have to realize, okay, sales is connected to the different departments and the different divisions over here in the departments table. And that can be broken down by things we know about the customers. So I'm going to click on the checkbox here for the type of customer we're talking about. So here we have direct to consumer, we have retail, white label, and wholesale as the types of customers for our grand total of $22 million in sales. And while we're at it, we can go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab at the top of the screen, click the Pivot Chart button, and insert a pivot chart. I think a column chart here makes a lot of sense, so I'll click OK. And just a basic amount of maintenance here. I am going to, item number 1, remove the gray buttons by clicking on Pivot Chart Analyze at the top of the screen and deselecting field buttons. I'm going to get rid of the completely unnecessary legend on the right-hand side. I'm going to take the title up at the top and make it mean something. And I like my columns and my column chart to be a little bit thicker, so I will click on these, press Control 1 in order to see the formatting options I have available, and let's go with a gap width of about 50%. Now, the other thing that I did here is I went ahead and made the sales dark blue, and I made the expenses dark red. So I'm going to go ahead and select it on these bars here, go to my paint bucket, and fill it with a dark blue. So we're doing well now. We can now click outside of that original pivot table and pivot chart and insert a new pivot table. So we go to Insert, Pivot Table, from Data Model, again, click OK. And this time around, I want total expenses, right? So I'll click the checkbox for expense amount and format it. So our total expenses right now come to about $1.2 million. And we know that that's broken down by which vendors we're working with. And so here we'll click the checkbox for the vendor type. And so we can see how much we're spending on different types of expenses. And one more time, we go to the Pivot Table Analyze tab at the top of the screen, click on Pivot Chart, and insert a new column chart. So I'll just slide this over and repeat that same basic process. Turning off the field buttons, removing the unnecessary legend, retitling, and then selecting the columns, pressing Control 1, and deciding on a different gap width, like 50%, and a different paint color. In this case, dark red will be good. And then you can do a little bit more with this. I like to see if I can make the two charts baselines line up. I would probably be inserting a line here to see if I can make that work. And I am going to make sure that there is no border around either of these two charts, because the border shows when things are off kilter from one another. Okay, so we have two pivot charts, two pivot tables. We're doing great. And if we click on either one of them, I'm going to click on the sales table, for example. We can go to Pivot Chart Analyze and click on Insert Slicer. So the slicer is a filter based on whatever field we want, whatever dimension we want. So click here on Insert Slicer. And again, we're going to go to All, and I'm going to slice this by division. So I'll click the checkbox for division. Now, if we think about our data model from just a second ago, division was connected to both sides, to both fact tables. So when we click OK here, theoretically, this is going to work out for us, except for one thing, and that is simply that this slicer does not automatically know that it should be connected to both pivot tables. So I'm going to go to the Slicer tab at the top of the screen, and I am going to first increase the number of columns so that the different divisions each fall into a different button side by side here. But more importantly, I'm going to go to Report Connections and click the checkbox for the second pivot table. And because in the data model, this dimension, this division dimension is connected to both fact tables, when we click OK, it should work really easily and beautifully. Let's check. If I click on beverage, it should filter both pivot charts at the same time. If I click on home, it should filter both charts at the same time. Pantry, both charts at the same time. And snack, both charts at the same time. Perfect. Everything is great. So as you can see, yes, Power Pivot is totally capable of dealing with what is known as a galaxy or a constellation data model. Now, there's one thing that you want to consider here, however. Let's go back to the data, and I want to show you why I said we would be back here. So in both instances, on the dimension tables over here, you'll see that I added a column for the customer's state and the vendor's state, okay? And you can see there's a lot of overlap here. It may not be perfect, right? We may not have customers in all the states that we have vendors in, but we all know what the states are, so should work. Except the problem is, if we go back to that data model, let's look at it one more time. So I'll go to the Power Pivot tab and manage the data model and look at the diagram view. If you notice here, vendors is related to expenses. It doesn't then pass through departments over to sales and then finally to customers. And in fact, there's no relationship between the vendor's state and the customer's state. So right now, if you were to add a slicer for customer state, it would filter the sales table. And if you were to filter the vendor's state, it would filter the expenses table, but not both at the same time. So if you were interested in what expenses and sales happened in the state of California, you would need to do something else, something additional here. Now, there are a couple of different ways that you could do this by merging data tables together and doing things like that. But one way that it does work is if we take these two dimensions and we then tie those together with a common table between them. So let's see how that would work here. As you can see, I've got a final dimension table here at the end. I haven't converted it into a table yet, so I'll click on it and use Control-T. And I will simply call this table states. And you can see it's both the state and the region that the state is in here. And here, I'll just go to my Power Pivot tab and add this to the data model, because when we're doing the relationships, I'd like you to actually see how this works. If I click here on Diagram View, you can see here that I can put states in between these two, and I can take vendor state and make a relationship to state, and I can take customer state and make a relationship to state. And so now what we want here, let's be very clear and careful about this. If we want to add a slicer based on state, it's going to be the state field from the states table, not the customer state and not the vendor state. And of course, if we want to do it by region, we would use it from that table as well. So let's put this to work. We can now return to our report over here. Click on either of the two pivot charts. And again, go to Pivot Chart Analyze and add a slicer by using Insert Slicer. Now, this table doesn't show up on this first panel. You have to click on All. And here we can go find our States table. And I'm just going to go ahead and click the checkbox here for Region and click OK. And one more time, I'll make this wider. and I'll increase the number of columns that are in the slicer. Like so. Now, remember, even though we set up the data model successfully, we still added this slicer to the first pivot chart. So we actually have to come in here to report connections up at the top of the screen, click on that, and make sure that we click the checkbox for the other pivot table as well. And now that we've done that, we can click OK. And if I click on Midwest, you see both pivot charts are filtered. If I click on Southeast or Mid-Atlantic or Home or Pantry or Snack, you can see here that it filters on all dimensions on both pivot tables and charts.